done. Some satisfaction in your government that violence levels are a little bit down from what they've been in the past, but it could flare up at any time, couldn't it? Last month in February, there were a dozen suicide attacks in just over a week. So you remain a very volatile and dangerous country, don't you?
Well, obviously, but we have now managed to break the sort of the backbone of the infrastructure that terrorists had built in our tribal belt after 9/11. So they don't have the same capacity to launch attacks.
3 attacks every day, well, according to the Supreme Court. 3 attacks every day.
No, the total, if you look at them compared to 2014, 2013, I mean 3-4 years earlier, they're down by 70%. And
but this is a report done by a Supreme Court commission in December, said 3 terror attacks every day. But your Supreme Court doesn't feel there's much to celebrate. It says you pass laws, but you don't enforce them.
Well, we don't celebrate. We are just saying that we are now turned the corner in terms of breaking the back of terrorists, because we have broken their infrastructure, which is in the tribal area. Secondly, we have launched a combined operation with the military to snake out those which are still there, and obviously the remnants are scattered all over the country.
One of your retired army generals admitted that until now nothing had been done about these extremist centres in Punjab. General Amjad Shoaib said that in Punjab, in southern Punjab, there are sanctuaries of hardcore militants which have not been targeted before. Why haven't they been targeted?
2 months ago.
Why haven't they been targeted? This was February. He said this.
Because they were not visible, and they were
activities. Well, he knew where they were.
Well, I mean, everybody knows that there are some areas.
How can they not be visible?
There are madrasas, hundreds of them, and some of them are. I think in the last 2 months, the Rangers action has started in Punjab, which is quite strong now, and many of these madrasas are being grounded.
Perhaps this inaction is because the Punjab is the Prime Minister's political stronghold, and he didn't want to offend some of the groups that have actually been delivering him votes.
I think the Punjab situation is exaggerated, but there are pockets in which there are religious madrasas for some time who were involved initially in the Afghan operation. Now they are involved in other activities.
Some of these extremist groups have simply been allowed to change their names and carry on as before.
You are not allowed. They did it, and you again try to catch them, and now we have banned the new names also, because it's not allowed to change names and continue.
Lashkar then became Jamaat, and last month it apparently morphed again into the TAJK, the Movement for Freedom in Jammu and Kashmir. But it still goes about its business, doesn't it?
No, we have arrested, put under detention its leader.
House arrest. House
arrest, that because
it's a slap on the wrist. It's nothing. It's just a slap on the wrist. It's the bare minimum that you could have done.
No, because we can't. If you do more, he will get acquittal after the court. 3 times he has got acquittal after the court.
This is a man who is suspected by India of masterminding the 2008 Mumbai attacks. India has provided you with its evidence to support that claim, but you refuse to do anything about this.
There are 7 other,
occasionally putting him under house arrest.
7 other members, but not him. His name is not directly involved. And now we have asked for additional evidence, which they have now given us.
No wonder your Human Rights Commission says that perhaps things, and this is after the February 17th bombings, perhaps things would have been different if the pledges made to crack down on all forms of hate speech and violence had been honoured. Their point is that your pledges were not honoured.
Now, the number of people who have been arrested for hate speech in the last 2 years since this National Action Plan run into thousands. But there must be still some who are doing it, and we are carrying out a very strict vigilance of all the Friday prayers and what people are saying.
You mentioned the madrasas.
First time we are doing this.
You mentioned the madrasas.
In madrasas, we have made a list of all the madrasas which are unregistered. We have closed down several thousand of them. Their funding is being monitored. Their sermons are being monitored.
So why does the Supreme Court say, regrettably, the functionaries of the state have stayed clear of the madrasas? There is no registration or monitoring of them.
No, I don't think that's correct. They were referring to a particular context.
They don't know what they're talking about?
I think they were referring to a particular context, and you are generalizing it. What we are saying is that the madrasa control and registration is a very important part of the National Action Plan, which has been going on.
Why do you pass laws, then, according to the Supreme Court, but you don't enforce them?
Well, that is probably a chronic problem everywhere. But I think we have, in terms of our laws.
In December, a Supreme Court commission slammed the National Counter-Terrorism Authority, saying it had categorically failed, and it called for top-tier accountability.
Well, I think these are something that should be appreciated, because Supreme Court wants the action to be accelerated. But you see, as you know from the experience of all other countries where terrorism is very rampant, that it's not easy to control it totally, and it takes time to calibrate and to judge your strengths and weaknesses, and in a sequential manner go after groups that are more amenable.
But these
And I
are
think-
key weaknesses, aren't they? The authorities' law, the counter-terrorism authorities' law, according to the Supreme Court, is not being implemented either by its Board of Governors, which has never met, or its Executive Committee, which has met only once in 3.5 years. Is this a picture of a government that's doing all it can against terrorism?
No, I think NACTA is just one of the agencies. The real
Well, it's a key one, isn't it? It's the National Counter-Terrorism Authority.
Potentially a key one. Right now, it's not the main player. It is a coordinating body, and it's the army which is doing it. We have a National Security Committee which is doing it. So the important thing that I think I'd like to underline,
Which is not being fulfilled.
No, it is being implemented more than 50-60%, not 100%, but 50-60%.
Well, we'll come on to some of the details of that,
Okay.
because
The first is
the Supreme Court is very critical.
No, that's true. Supreme Court should be critical because they want us to do better.
But they paint a devastating picture of government incompetence and dereliction of duty. It says the Ministry of Interior is without clear leadership and direction and is confused about its role in combating terrorism.
Well, I think...
Mr. Aziz, this isn't funny, is it? It might be laughable if it wasn't so tragic.
The adjectives you are adding to it, because the commentary referred to a particular context. So you have to look at the total context. The total context is...
It is looking at the total context. It's looking at the ministry.
No, ministry is sort of one player. The basic
it's a key player. It's the Interior Ministry. Interior Ministry. And it's confused about its role in combating terrorism.
Well, not confused. I mean, obviously, the extent to which there is a division of responsibility between the provincial governments and the federal government. There's a division of responsibility between the army and the civilian government. Then there is a semi-military. So by confusion is actually referring to what the federal government has to do, what the provincial government has to do. But that doesn't mean that they're not working.
But Mr. Aziz, the basic accusation is that your government could have prevented many deaths if it had enforced its own laws, and even now is taking measures that some of your state authorities believe are inadequate. Let's look at that action plan, because in 2014, after the massacre of 130 schoolboys in Peshawar, you adopted this plan. But the Commission of the Supreme Court says it is not a plan in any structured or meaningful way. Banned organizations continue their illegal activities, and new terrorist organizations are prescribed only after long delays. Some terrorist organizations have still not been prosecuted, even when their claims of responsibility have been broadcast and printed. Why? Why is that?
First of all, you can't eliminate terrorism only through laws. It requires action. Laws are applied to normal citizens and other things. Laws just enable you to do more.
You're making light of laws. These are essential. You pass regulations and laws and you don't abide by them.
When you talk of laws, there are many terrorists whom in the previous 10-15 years ago, you could not even try because the judges were afraid of them. Witnesses were scared that if they give evidence against terrorists, they'll be killed.
But perhaps you can explain this to me, sir. More than 3 months after last August's attack on Quetta, which killed and wounded scores of people, the organizations that claimed responsibility had still not been referred to the Interior Minister in order for them to be banned. Asked in a commission hearing if he was amazed by that delay, the Interior Secretary replied, "I wouldn't categorize that as strange." More than 3 months after the attack and nothing had been done to ban this organization that had claimed responsibility. That's pretty shocking, isn't it?
You see, the organization that did the Quetta attack is outside Pakistan and is in Afghanistan. And a large number of attacks are now emanating from the other side.
You don't need them on your territory to ban them. You can ban them by order of the ministry.
No, I don't think there is any sympathy for them. The only thing is that just by banning them, you can't eliminate their activities. It requires a very judicious combination of kinetic action, intelligence sharing controls, fundraising controls, and then trying to arrest those that you can.
But the reality is that people are being killed and wounded on your streets, on the streets of Pakistan, day after day, and it takes the government more than 3 months to even consider banning the organizations that do this. That's a spectacular failure, isn't it?
The spectacular result is that the total number of incidents in the last 2 years are down by 70%. And if that is not a...
As we pointed out, it can flare up again at any time.
It won't flare up at that scale. There are isolated incidents here and there.
Another example of a broken promise from your National Action Plan. Point 3, militant outfits and armed gangs will not be allowed to operate in the country. As it turns out, not only are they allowed to operate, but they can also have meetings with top ministers, can't they?
Well, there are one or two isolated examples. I think
well, that sends a great signal, doesn't it?
No,
that your rules are worthless because top ministers can ignore them.
You have to interact with the leadership of all the parties. Some of them maybe have concealed militant wings. So if in a group they come, you can't say all of you are sit, one of you should walk out. These are, see...
The Commission of the Supreme Court accused the Minister of the Interior of cavorting with members of banned organisation and says your hypocrisy has to stop.
Made a statement.
It's accusing you of hypocrisy.
The minister made a statement that there was one member who came with a big group and later on it was indicated that he belonged to such a group.
But this makes a mockery of your promise to prevent militant groups operating in your country when your senior ministers in your government are meeting them, cavorting with them, as the Supreme Court calls it.
Sometimes you have to, there are some groups which are doing a lot of other activities and you have to persuade them to not to allow some of their institutions or individuals to go further.
The Chief Secretary of the Government of Baluchistan told the Supreme Court Commission that the banned group ASWJ had been allowed to hold meetings on a hockey ground in Islamabad. So once again, your own regulations and laws are broken and nobody seems to want to do anything about it. This is a banned group. It's on a hockey pitch in Islamabad, in the middle of Islamabad. It's not even hiding the fact.
It's a very complex situation. It is a very complex situation and you can't single out one organization. They have different connotation. Some are totally sort of vulnerable from Pakistan point of view because they are attacking the state and the writ of the state.
I'm talking about government actions here. This is what the Supreme Court... what the Supreme Court is trying to hold you accountable for. This is a highly respected organization in Pakistan.
I think that Supreme Court report that you are referring to was in a particular context. You are generalizing it and trying to use it to put cold water on all the things we have done.
I'm not using I'm merely repeating what the court says.
It out of context.
The court accuses the minister, the Interior Minister, of violating the decisions of the National Counterterrorism Authority and displaying little sense of ministerial responsibility. My question to you is, what do you have to do to get sacked from this government? I think if he shows little sense of ministerial responsibility, why is he still in his post?
I think it is, see, that commission report was in a particular context, and I don't think it amounted to anything that would deserve the sacking of the minister. I think the Minister of Interior has done a very good job in a very difficult circumstance to deal with the, because it's not just terrorism, it is extremism. It is generally the radicalization. It's a series of things because people look at it.
And the Supreme Court describes the Ministry of Religious Affairs and Interfaith Harmony as a moribund ministry and says that the complete lack of a counter-extremism narrative is deplorable, lamentable, and totally tragic.
I think the Ministry of Religious Affairs has a totally different function. They are trying to modernize and sort of mainstream the religious seminaries so that they can teach mathematics, they can teach science, they can teach computer, and we have a system.
But the court says the public space needs to be reclaimed to counteract terrorist propaganda. Well, and that's not happening.
But it is happening at a substantial scale, but still remains.
It says it's a complete lack of a counter-extremism narrative. Deplorable, lamentable, and totally tragic. You couldn't be much more condemned by the Supreme Court, could you?
Well, I think they always try to hold you to do better, but I think the progress we have made in all these factors is quite significant.
It's no wonder then that if you can't even convince your Supreme Court, you're not going to convince the Americans either that you're doing your best about terrorism. In December, General John Nicholson, the US commander in Afghanistan, said Pakistan is continuing to offer sanctuary to terror groups which are targeting Americans in Afghanistan. Why? Why are you continuing to give them sanctuary?
I don't think we give them sanctuaries. There were sanctuaries in our tribal belt and those have been destroyed. There are sanctuaries. Now, if somebody has escaped from their sanctuaries and scattered somewhere and taken a house, is that sanctuary? is if somebody came 20 years ago or 15 years ago.
You don't seem to be able to get that message through to the Americans, because last October, the acting Undersecretary at the Treasury, Adam Subin, was even clearer. He said there had been some cooperation with Pakistan. He said, but the problem is there are forces within the Pakistani government, specifically in the Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, that refuse to take similar steps against all the terrorist groups active in Pakistan, tolerating some groups or even worse. This is a distinction, he said, that we cannot stand for.
Well,
It's tough words. They're giving you a choice.
But US has a certain narrative which is a bit out of date, because this thing was valid 2-3 years ago when they had the sanctuaries. Now they don't.
This was last October.
I know, but they're still not updated, and they know that the activities that are happening in Afghanistan
Last July.
Are actually within Afghanistan.
But here's the warning. There should be no doubt that while we remain committed to working with Pakistan to confront terrorist financing and operations, the US will not hesitate to act alone when necessary to disrupt and destroy these networks.
If they had been active enough to stop people who were filtering into Afghanistan after our operation Zarb-e-Azb, Afghanistan situation would have been better. They did not provide the anvil at that time, and many people went, and now we are trying to manage the border in such a way that no unauthorized person can go across.
The Congressional Committee chairman for the Counter-Terrorism Committee said the US has spent tens of billions of taxpayers' dollars in Pakistan since 9/11. Now, 15 years later, Pakistan's military and intelligence services are linked to terrorist organizations, and little success has been made to stabilize the region.
Two clarifications. One, the amount of money we got was the Coalition Support Fund, which was not assistance. It was the reimbursement of the expenditure we had incurred in support of US forces in Afghanistan. So it was not what you call aid money or
The international community has already also provided huge sums of money.
No, the total amount that we have received for this kind of a thing, we have suffered losses of $110 billion, and what little bit of road building or other we have received is not. So the perception that US has given money to Pakistan for this is incorrect. And now the net flow is very small, and we are more interested in trade rather than aid. Secondly,
are you more interested now in sealing your borders, because the Supreme Court says that international crossings on the western borders of your country are not monitored? No record is kept of anyone entering or leaving Pakistan.
We've already started on that.
But why did you wait so long? Because you had open borders.
No, this is the arrangement with Afghanistan. It was centuries old that people are living on both sides of the tribal area, and they can every day 50,000 people cross. And even now,
the court says there's a widely held perception that the illegal ingress and egress of people and goods is incredibly valuable, and it serves the personal interests of some functionaries of the state. We're talking about corruption here.
I don't think so. We have now taken very decisive decisions to have a large number of crossing points, and not only two, with biometrics, with proper fencing, and with documentation. So,
in 2015, your president said the menace of corruption is so deep-rooted that it has weakened the very fabric of your society. Our deprivations, distresses, and afflictions are the products of corruption, he said.
Well, I think we have...
and we're seeing that in your border policy, aren't we? Let's be honest about this. That's why your borders were open.
The border policy is the legacy of the British when they left this system.
The British have been gone a very long time.
I know, but the system has remained the same.
You can't keep blaming... Yeah, but that's your fault, isn't it? If it's remained the same.
Because they
can't blame that on the British.
Well, I think if they had integrated a tribal area during their time, by now we would have inherited it. And it was left into such a difficult socio-political environment that it was difficult to convert them without upheaval, because those people are used to carrying their own arms. They were not ready for enforcement of laws, and they would say we are independent. So,
a lot of different views on your record. Sartaj Aziz, thanks very much for being on Conflict Zone.